So let me start off by saying welcome to another Mathematic virtual event. I'm Rachel Robinson, Vice President of Mathematic, and it's really great to see all of you again today. And I'm very excited to have you joining us for this webinar on connected medical products. So Intertech, who will be introducing themselves in a short bit, has been an outstanding supporter of Mathematic for the last, I don't even know, several years. And we are absolutely thrilled that we partnered with them to put together this presentation. They are an excellent resource. If you're not familiar with them, you will be after this meeting, and they're going to answer what I know is a ton of your questions. So just a few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. We suggest that you put your questions in the Q&A section in the bottom of your screen. Absolutely welcome questions throughout. There'll be breaks for them to kind of answer those as they go, but please put those in the Q&A. And if you have any issues or technical issues, shoot me a note at rachel@mathematic.com. We can always help you work through those. Otherwise, I am going to go ahead and kick things off by turning it over to Joe and George.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to educate you on connected medical products. My name is George Strom. I'm the Director of Business Development for Intertech's Connected World. And along with Joe Dawson, who is our lead cybersecurity engineer, we'll go through a host of topics today. So hopefully we make the complex seem very simple and educate you on how we can help you folks through this growing requirement field. For some reason, I can't move my stickers. So very quickly, for those of you that know Intertech and for those of you that are new to Intertech, we're a global company with over 43,000 employees. And what I find this really intriguing is when I started with Intertech, we had about 7,000 employees, and we grew largely through two initiatives. One was a very organic initiative where we tested like products for like manufacturers. The second one was acquisition. And the acquisitions we've done over the past 25 years have largely come from our clients like yourself, asking us to do more and test more for their product categories because they simply was a need in the marketplace. And what happened over the past 5 years is we went out and we purchased 3 different product-based cybersecurity companies. The first one, which Joe works for, is Intertech EWA Canada. And the second one was a company in Maryland called Intertech Acumen Security. And the third was Intertech NTA Monitor. And it's really important to understand that these product-based security companies have a legacy of up to 30 years of product-based cybersecurity, conducting everything from common criteria investigations to FIPS 140-3 assessments, as well as payment card insurance. Today, we have about 160 cybersecurity engineers at a global level. And one very important thing we did to help understand the marketplace better, we took Joe Dawson very specifically and got him engaged with 2 very critical standard technical panels, one being the UL 2900 series, and the second, the IEC 62443, which today is becoming very relevant in the European Union and their new standard, the IEC 60601-4-5. And to round out our portfolio, we actually have a laboratory in Lexington, Kentucky that conducts connectivity testing, everything from regulatory testing, FCC certification, if you would, as well as 4G and 5G certification for cellular connectivity. And then the third and final part of our group that frames out the connected world is our Interoperability Group, which tests mobile applications for end user experience when it comes out of the box. You know, when someone tries to download or pair your device, will it actually work in an Android or iOS environment? And that complementary service really is the framework for our IoT solution or connected medical solution in the marketplace. And this is a good snapshot of the footprint. While we have many offices around the globe, and I physically work out of the Boxborough, Massachusetts office, the offices for the connected world really have grown in twofold. One, we opened a new office in Aami, India, to support the common criteria growth we're seeing there. And as well as Kista, Sweden, we added a common criteria laboratory to support the European clients. So we're not adverse to grow the portfolio of where we sit. It all is based on customer demand. When I started with Intertech in 1995, probably the biggest concern our clients had were the regulatory concerns, such as the EMC directive and the growing medical device directive. That has really shifted over the past generation, if you would, where connectivity is now a tremendous concern, the access to data, and then on top becomes security. And why is that so important? As consumers, we all want to protect our data, but as medical device manufacturers, you want to not only protect the data of your patients, but also the intellectual property of your device. And this has really changed dramatically over the past 15 months, with obviously the pandemic has taken traditional products that would sit in the hospital, but now residing in the home healthcare arena, which opens up a new realm of possibility for security issues for our clients. One of the tremendous stats that I think is the most intriguing stat that I find with medical devices is that a hospital bed averages 10 to 15 connected devices per bed. And as I referenced in my earlier slide, home healthcare has become a different issue or a new issue for traditional products. But if you think about having 15 connected products to a hospital bed, they're not all made by the same manufacturer. Does that represent a risk that your product potentially could be hacked? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Joe Dawson. Joe is, as I said, on 2 standard technical panels and has been doing product-based cybersecurity for the better part of 30 years. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks, George. And just to give a little background on that, what George has brought up, I've been doing, as George said, cybersecurity testing or hacking into cybersecurity devices for, like George said, 30 years. And it's been a really interesting experience. I started off in the traditional sort of banking, telecom sectors, and then moving on to, of course, medical sectors and IoT devices now. And what I find really fascinating is that over the years of 30 years experience, for the first, 10 or 15 years, finding vulnerabilities was quite difficult. And then as we move to new sectors and new spaces, what I find is then finding vulnerabilities is quite easy. So we've found generally in the medical sector, sadly, that finding vulnerabilities has been quite a bit easier than it has been in other sectors because, I guess, of the fact that this is a new technology, that people are taking legacy devices and now newly connecting them to the internet and not really having a legacy of security with it. So when we talk about security, and to this end in the slide, what we look at is about when we see a medical device that's connected, we need to have, the device itself needs to have the ability to protect, the patient data that's in it, and making sure that, someone can't access the information stored in that device. But then the next thing we have beyond that is making sure that, if someone does get unauthorized access to that device and starts to manipulate it, what are they able to do? So if somebody gets into the device, then what's the scope of the risk there? And finally, can that medical device be used to attack and launch attacks against other devices in the hospital? And this is a really interesting thought, that we have this concept that there's some medical devices that people don't consider to be significant risks because maybe they only provide a low-level risk, that they're not considered by the FDA or others to be high risk, but they're on the medical network next to other devices that could be high risk. So having your device in the hospital network becoming sort of the access point, which is then leveraged to then attack other devices, is something you need to consider as well. So even if your device is not the end goal for the hacker, you don't want it to be the entry point for the system, and where you basically you don't want to become the weakest link in the chain, because at any of these points, if you're the weakest link, then that's what the hacker will use to compromise your device, to either get information on your device or then to use it to access other devices. So, as we talk about this, what we're seeing with these devices are being increasingly more complex. A lot of these devices that we're testing in our labs have been around for a very long time, but have had no internet or Wi-Fi capability. And we're seeing these legacy devices start to get additional networking capabilities or additional functionality added to them. And then these devices then become connected to back-end systems, integrated to the internet, and really, having remote surgical functionalities coming on some of these devices, remote monitoring capabilities. We're starting to see Bluetooth and RFID added to devices, and every new feature and function you add from a hacker's perspective is a new vector of attack. We look at it a little differently. You look at it as, oh, we're adding this Wi-Fi capability. Isn't that great? And as a hacker, we go, great, there's a new way for us to compromise this device that didn't exist before. And even RFID, we're seeing that as a method that hackers are using to compromise devices. So every new feature you add, there's a new risk, and it needs to be considered. So as we talk about this with the risks, of course, there's human life safety. a huge issue that we're dealing with, loss of confidentiality. So, how are you as an organization dealing with this? How are you ensuring that this has been dealt with? Some of the biggest aspects of this, personal information, obviously, but we're really seeing, that human life safety is becoming a big part of these devices. That these devices have the ability, if they're a laser, we're seeing that there's software that controls the energy output of the device or decides how much medication is going to be given to somebody. So the real medical risks here need to be fully considered. And that, when it makes decisions, as it happens so often now, those software-based decisions can be compromised in ways that you didn't anticipate in your risk assessment, and you need to really consider the misuse of your device, not just the normal use of your device. And so we want to make clear, by the way, in this slide, that we don't think that medical health professionals, even though we show a picture of one, is actually your biggest risk. But we do see, that sometimes the risks are accidental, use. So that the fact that somebody, through the user interface may have made a mistake and a configuration option that then has patient harm, but also beyond that, they may have misconfigured the device in the initial setup that causes the device to be less secure. They may have created and set up the device where they set their user password to be password or something simple like that, not realizing that that also allows remote access to the device to become easier. So they don't consider that. The other aspect is when a hacker breaks into a network and starts attacking a network, they see it as an IP address. They don't often even know that they're in a hospital. So they're scanning the network for devices. So they see a vulnerable Linux or a vulnerable Windows computer. They don't realize that that's actually a medical device providing life support and other medically important features to the patient. So when they're compromising this, they just think they're going at another PC. They're just trying to find things to do. They're doing ransomware. They're doing vandalism. They're doing all these sorts of things. And they don't necessarily even realize the impact that they're causing on the end user when they're attacking these devices. And it's quite scary what we're seeing today, that we've seen major hospital networks get taken down, and they don't care. They just don't care. They just want to get money or ransomware or compromise a device. And we've even seen ransomware installed unknown to the hackers on medical devices. So it's a real issue. And I think we're going to talk about some connected medical device standards here. So some of these standards and regulatories that we're involved in. So George, are you going to cover this one, I think?
Absolutely, Joe. I think one of the most compelling issues that we've seen really on the fastest growing area of regulatory concerns is the amount of countries that have actually launched cybersecurity requirements from a regulated perspective, whether it be FDA style, Health Canada. And probably the three biggest areas we've seen are really the US, Canada, and the European Union. And in October 2018, the FDA launched their pre-market requirements for cybersecurity. And we've seen a lot of files kicked back from the FDA recently due to cloud connectivity and USB ports. And equally, I think one of the biggest hurdles that our clients will face will be in the European Union with the medical device regulation. The medical device directive had one unique paragraph that looked at cybersecurity. The MDR has 4 unique paragraphs, which are very telling and very, very complex to read. Equally, the in vitro diagnostic requirements have the same cybersecurity directive. It's very interesting to note, though, that the new standard for medical devices in the European Union, the IEC 60601-4-5, does not apply to the IVDR. So keep that in mind. While there's other avenues to go, if you're looking at that as a solution for the IVDR, it's not today a solution. I think that with, as I referenced, there's a number of standards, and the ones that we come across probably most frequently, and perhaps the largest request from device manufacturers, is the FDA consensus standard, UL 2900-2-1, which is a really solid standard. And it really represents a challenge for manufacturers. It's roughly 250 plus sections to the standard. So it's not a trivial standard, and there's 2 definitive avenues that you can pursue in that standard. And we have clients that work in parallel for both sections of the standard, one for the process based on the product. And the second avenue they pursue is often the IoT security testing. as well as they leverage the new standard out there for 60601-4-5 really leverages the IEC 62443-4-1 and introduces security level controls into the standard. So it's a very unique standard that it's going to be a game changer for a lot of manufacturers. 62443 is a very good standard. They're both good standards, not advocating one or the other, but they're both very well written standards. And the fact of looking at security levels, it really depends on the risk factor or the risk management that a device manufacturer has on their product. So when we look at the MDR, I think this is one that is really probably the biggest one that I would say we've seen notified bodies actually issue corrective actions to device manufacturers because they don't have any security process or procedures. And this is where you really have to take a look at your device and plan for your cybersecurity. It's better to plan for it than try to plug it in. And the 4 unique paragraphs are, again, they're very definitive. And just a cautionary tale, if Intertech is your notified body, we're limited on what we can tell you we can do. If we're not your notified body, we have a really broad scope of what we can offer. So just a cautionary tale there, but it's important to understand that how you plan for it and how you maintain your product lifecycle. As an example, the MDR, if you're looking to change your software or upgrade your software in any way, shape, or form, there's now a process that has to go through an internal review, who authorized it, how it's authorized, and how you're going to implement that patching out to the marketplace. Is it going to be over the air updates, or is it going to be done through your personnel? So that's something that has to be now documented as an example in the MDR. And this is a really good slide on the actual process flow for the MDR. And I think it's very important to understand that it starts really with secure design and it goes through a software, all the way to software lifecycle. And that's very important for manufacturers and how you have those controls and identifying the threats. I think it also calls out very specifically, if you read through, there's a really good document out there from the NDCG. It really talks about if you have a wireless device, you should have a third-party objective penetration test conducted. Now, many of our clients are already conducting third-party assessments for penetration tests. They may not be organizing them at the QA/RA level, and it's probably their IT group that may be orchestrating it. But now what's being asked upon manufacturers is that they coordinate that with their IT department. They have record of it so they can produce that objective evidence if needed. And that's really, I guess, the biggest hurdle is people, left or right may not know what they're doing, but now it's being asked to coordinate the information and consolidate. So Joe, I'm going to turn it back to you for the connected medical reference standards.
Absolutely. So one of the points George made in the previous slide that I could probably also add to was the fact also that he talked about internal bodies doing some of this testing in organizations. And we're seeing some of that, but understand that most of the internal bodies are used to getting things operational and functional. They're not necessarily used to the malicious type of attacking that we do. Having people who have had many years experience breaking into things and hacking into things is pretty valuable. And it's rare that you have those types of people in your organization. If you do, great. But if you don't, make sure that, the people who are doing any internal testing you're doing have had some experience actually compromising and testing systems as well. Because you want to make sure that internal validation you're doing is meaningful, right? So some of the standards out there that we want to talk about is the Nist cybersecurity framework. And the Nist course is a federal agency out of the United States, which provides tremendous guidance and capability on looking at how you should define and set up your security procedures. This is a great baseline for organizational security. This helps organizations understand how to deal with at an organizational level security. So how do you deal with it from a HR perspective? How do you deal with it from a process perspective? But what you need to understand when the limitation to this standard is it's not a device standard. It's not a product standard. It's about how your organization internally in your corporate infrastructure deals with security. Also, you cannot be certified to this standard. This is a best practice of how to do something and how to keep an organization running and functioning well, but is not necessarily driven towards a product or to a specific device and has no specific medical requirement to it at all. The next one we want to talk about is the IEC 62443, and this one has a number of sections to it that can really get into quite a bit of detail. But this is a really good standard that was originally connected for sort of SCADA industrial control systems, but we're definitely seeing it being used now in medical space and actually being referenced by a number of standards, as George mentioned, that there's the MDR and other documents, other standards out there are starting to reference the IEC 62443. So having and following practices and being certified to IEC 62443 standards as you sell or manufacture products into Europe is going to become more and more valuable over time. Absolutely. And this slide really breaks down to the number of types of certifications that are available under IEC 62443. So it really gets in the high level general, the policies and procedures, the systems and the components, and really depends on what you're building and what your product is. As an organization who's implementing, a hospital might do some of the general things or have some of the policies and procedures, and you as the product manufacturer may start to be looking at your certifications more at the system or component level. So really, if you're selling a large system of multiple devices, you're going to want a system level, and if you're selling specific individual devices, then you're going to want component level certification. So for each one of these, so actually we had an interesting question. So this standard is applicable in Europe and in North America. Someone asked about, what's applicable where. We're seeing more reference to the IEC standards by clients in Europe, I would say, where in North America, we're maybe seeing more towards the UL standard, which we'll talk about next. But each one of these boxes represents a possible certification that you could have under your device. So you can see that there's a number of different certification options. In the North American market, we're seeing a little more, especially on the FDA side, we're seeing more traction towards UL 2900 2-1, which is a standard for connected medical and healthcare components. It's an excellent standard. Again, as George said, as a testing lab, we want to be standard agnostic. We don't want to pick favorites. But I'll break that rule a little bit and say that this is one of my favorites. But the reason I picked this one as one of my favorites is that, when I say North America, I do include Canada. Thank you for that question. So yes, so North America and Canada, we do see more reference to UL 2900. The reason I like this standard a little more than the IEC standard is because of the requirement to have a little bit more independent testing. And the IEC standards allow a vendor to provide evidence to a lab that the device was tested properly. And then the lab is reviewing that evidence. You'll find more often in UL 2900, the labs are involved in the actual testing of the product. And the reason I like that a bit better is because I know the quality of the people doing the testing. And whereas there's a bit of a question on my mind is someone who's doing the testing and providing evidence to a lab for an IEC standard qualified to do it? So it's a bit more of a trick there to validate. We find less of that type of issue. This, however, is a more difficult standard to meet, which is another reason I like it, because it's a higher bar and it really gets into the weeds of what needs to happen to meet certification. I would suggest if you can meet this standard, the others will be easier, that this is going to be the most difficult one to meet, but it's also going to give you the highest degree of assurance that your device is secure. And so I want to talk about some of the challenges for connected and medical device products. So one of the things that we need to do is you really need to understand, what kind of device are you building? Some medical devices sit in an operating room and have very little remote connection, maybe connected to a hospital network for some information. But what we're seeing now is more and more what we like to call this triangle here, which is that a lot of devices are reaching out to a cloud interface, a cloud service. There might be even mobile apps or web apps that are used to control the device. And that we really need to understand the full scope of that. Where are the decisions being made? We've even seen devices in operating rooms where the configuration that's used on the device gets downloaded from the cloud, so that when a doctor goes into the operating room, he logs in with his credentials, or someone logged in for him with the credentials, and it downloads a configuration of how the pedals and how aspects of the device operate based on his personal needs, which I find fascinating, because I think about that from the perspective of, you can imagine if you had a car that you could choose whether or not the pedal on the left or the right was the gas or the brake. And the idea that these devices allow doctors to have this level of configuration is fascinating, but it also has a tremendous amount of risk, because, you know, if somebody compromised that cloud service and then the device downloaded the wrong information, when the doctor thought he was doing suction, he was actually cutting or doing something else because he hit the wrong pedal, there's a tremendous amount of risk there. So we really need to look at the risk, and we really do testing on all three aspects of this, the mobile app, the cloud, and the device, to ensure that there's really no risks or stone left unturned. And, you know, when you're looking at this on the security side, we had to balance, you know, the risk, you know, versus safety. And of course, on the medical side, we're always going to go towards safety first. But, you know, making sure the design of your product is good is critically important. Looking at what third parties are providing software and hardware to you, and how those integrate with your devices, and making sure that, you know, you've got a good balance here, that, you know, maybe you're dotting all the I's and crossing the T's, but you're getting some third-party components that you're relying on, and they have software in them, and you're not necessarily knowing or have access to the risks and the software code that's coming from third-party vendors that you may be integrating with. So really consider that as well. And this really talks about when you're building any software program nowadays. I mean, you are building the Lego brick on the top, if you will, the vendor code. That's your secret sauce. That's where all your software is. But really, you're probably not writing the operating system, whether or not you're using Windows or QNX or Linux or something else. There's got a lot of vulnerabilities there. There's device drivers, there's open source libraries, there's a whole host of issues here that you need to consider. And you really need to make sure that, you know, when it comes to patching and updating, that you're dealing with all of these. That you're not just dealing with your vendor code. So, you know, when we talk about designing for security, we want to make sure that you're really considering sort of, you know, minimizing the attack surfaces on your device and establishing secure defaults. And what that means is that, you know, if somebody, you're not asking someone to turn a feature on to make it secure, that by default, out of the box, the device is secure, that it doesn't have password as a password or some default weak situation, that if a user doesn't do what they should, the device is still going to be secure. You want to make sure almost that, you know, if a user connects this to a network that's not secure, if somebody connected your device almost to the internet, is it going to be secure? Or that you make sure that you well document the environment that the user needs to connect it to, that, hey, if your device needs to be connected on a network and needs to be behind a firewall, that better be clearly said in your documentation. And that you want to make sure, you know, that the least privileges, so that users don't have pervasive ability to do things they don't need to do. When your device fails, if there is a fail scenario or it sees someone is attacking it, you need to make sure it fails in a secure manner, that it's not going to fail in an open situation. And one of the scenarios that we saw with that was we've seen devices where when they get busy or when they get under heavy load, to make sure that they continue to function, they actually start turning off security features. So we've even seen firewalls that sort of open up rules and allow access because they got busy. So you want to make sure that, you know, when things fail, they don't become more open that they fail to close down. And you know, the separation of duties to make sure that people who are having access to this, like the people who do maintenance on the devices, don't have access to patient data, for example. And you know, we've seen situations too on medical devices where number 8's become a big issue, where basically they say, you know, to get into admin mode on this device, you need to know a special sequence to do, sort of like press this button 3 times and you're in admin mode. And somehow they think that's secure because no one's going to know that you need to press the on button 3 times to get into admin mode. That's not security. That's security through obscurity, right? And finally, you need to make sure that when we're fixing things, that we're fixing all of the security problems. So it's not just the security problems, the whole device from an end-to-end perspective, and that you're really dealing with the full gambit of security for your device. We could, George and I both have done our presentations, I'm sure, on risk and safety management. But it's really, you know, the question is, you know, referring to, you know, what do you need to look at? Is it denial of service, buffer overflows, man in the middle? You know, what are the risks? How are you dealing with them? And that when you're doing your risk assessments on medical devices, which is something that the medical profession has done for decades, you've always looked at safety and security, but you've never considered or rarely considered cyber in that equation. So that needs to be, it's a new consideration, and sort of, you know, looking at what happens when somebody does unexpected things to the device. And cyber is fundamentally different from electrical certifications and other certifications we've seen in the past, because I always tell people with electrical certifications, for example, you look at sort of normal use. You don't consider in cyber, we have to consider what happens if a guy sticks a fork in the wall outlet, right? Like, we have to think about the crazy scenarios. We have to think about, like, users are going to do things or try to do things that are not normal activity, and that we need to make sure that under that unusual activity, the devices and the safety systems are still secure and the patient is not harmed in all situations. But again, you know, if you really want to get into the risk assessment and dealing with safety and security, George and I can do it. We can come back to MassMedic and probably do a whole hour on this. And we have decks to get dedicated to this activity. So we can't cover it all today. And George, this is your part or mine for this one?
This is all you, Joe.
Oh, it's all me? Wow,
Yeah, it's all you.
I get to go right to the end. No problem.
Why would I stop greatness, Joe?
Oh, man, yeah. So, you know, when we're looking at connected medical security, you know, the design review is a really important thing. And the nice thing about the design review is that can happen early. That can happen before the device is built. We're thinking about building a device. We're thinking about building a device that's going to do these 3 things. And it's going to connect the patient this way. And this is how we're going to build it. And we've sat down with companies and done security design reviews in very early stages. Obviously, it can happen in later stage. I'm not saying because your device is built, you still can't do it, but you can do a design review anytime. A vulnerability assessment or penetration testing needs to have some product to test. So this has to happen after a alpha or beta version of the product exists, but it can happen fairly early. And earlier the better. The worst case on these is we've seen devices come in for penetration testing just before they're going to go to the market for release, and we find major vulnerabilities, and then they got to go back to R&D, and then they got to get fixed, and it's a bit of a problem. But you need to have it. But better still to have it tested by us than found out by the general public and someone gets harmed, right? You also, for a lot of these standards, you're going to start to see that we're going to be looking at static and binary code testing. So we're going to be looking at getting your software tested and make sure that it's not vulnerable. These standards for medical devices really stress that requirement, and it's critically important. The thing is malformed input, and this has been a big thing for the FDA and a number of clients. Even we're getting requests from medical associations in Japan and around the world saying that, you know, we have devices that have USB ports and other things. We want to have them fuzzed. We want to have them manipulated. We want to make sure that the device will respond to bad attacks. And so we've been doing a lot of that, and that's been a huge issue for us, of having devices come in the labs to get, you know, just a USB port tested or something, because of getting requests from a regulator in some country in Europe or Asia or North America that's saying, have you considered the risks of the USB ports? And so we can bring them in the labs, and we do that. And, you know, we're making sure also that you can't bypass security. So, you know, there's no functional way to do something that allows you to get around a security measure, that allows you to give a patient more dosage than they're supposed to get, or turn a laser up higher than it's supposed to go, or allow somebody at a lower level access to be able to configure something that they shouldn't be able to do unless they're a doctor or somebody else. And so, you know, when we're talking about the, you know, the recommendations, we want to start with a secure process. So we have these, you know, start secure. We're listing standards here that work towards that. So you want to make sure that, you know, that your organization has to have security as well. So organizational security is important, because you think about this, all your software is being built in that environment. So if a hacker is in the corporate environment that you're developing your products within, they're going to be able to do things to the code before they even go into the product. So, you know, you need to make sure that all of the ongoing security, that your corporate IT people are deeply involved and making sure that that's happening. And then, of course, that goes to your ongoing security assessments of the products and the network in your corporation, right to the awareness and training. And all of this needs to happen, not just from a product perspective, but at an organizational perspective as well. I think that's it, George, for our deck for today. I think we got a couple questions down there. So they were one of the questions we have is someone's asking, do you mind talking a bit more about how, I guess the question is how mandatory the standards are. Are you looking at that question as well, George?
Yeah, I'll take that question, Joe. I think the applicability of the standard is really dependent upon the region. For example, with the FDA, while they acknowledge a consensus standard with UL 2900-2-1, they may just be asking the manufacturer to have certain objective evidence, such as a fuzzing test or, you know, an assessment done on cloud connectivity. However, with the European Union, it's a little bit of to be determined how a notified body will look for the applicability and for the objective evidence to the new standard that just was published. So a lot of it is based on some legacy issues, some supplier-based requirements that a supplier would then mandate to the manufacturer that they have to have certain tasks done, such as a penetration test.
Right. And that's the other thing too. We have been seeing that a number of our clients have been getting questions from European regulatory agencies, or American or Canadian regulatory agencies. And I want to say that without exception, anytime that they've brought a device to us, we've been able to, you know, do some penetration testing or testing to any of these standards, because that's the other thing is not everyone needs to be UL 2900 certified, but we can do cybersecurity testing based on the UL 2900 standard, so that you're not necessarily getting a certificate, but we're following the testing procedures of the standard to prove that we have objective evidence that if you were to go for the standard, you would probably pass. So oftentimes that's more than enough for certain companies.
That's a great question, by the way. I don't know who asked that. That's a tremendous question.
Are you seeing the next one there, George? I'm
going to keep my screen as is, Joe. If you want to read it off, that's fine.
What's your opinion on the use of AAMI guidance for cybersecurity risk assessment, and it's harmonized with other standards?
Yeah, are you referring to the TI? I presume it's the TIR 57 document.
I presume it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great document.
Yeah.
We're huge fans of that document, and we promote it.
Yeah,
Eric, is that the document you're talking about? Because if it is, yes, it's great. It's wonderful. We use it every day. And I don't know what more to add than that, George.
Well, I think with the Aami standard, it also could be dovetailing into this new IAC standard that is out there. There's a couple others, is in 80,000-1, which is more centric to hospitals. But if it's a TR 57, spot on, Joe.
Yeah. So I'm going to hit Colin's question next, which is, does HIPAA include cybersecurity requirements? No, it does not.
No.
It's privacy, but not security. There is a difference. It's a pretty complicated difference. People find that very confusing. A lot of security people do as well. But you can have good privacy and bad security. And you can have good security and generally bad privacy, but it's a little more difficult. Another question is, can I give an example of how a medical device can pass USB related attack tests? I will give an example of how it can fail first, and then I'll talk about how it can pass. So we had a medical device that came into the labs that was a respirator, I believe, and it had a USB port for diagnostics. And we started doing some fuzzing using some USB fuzzing devices, tests and some special hardware. And that when we found that, we were able to cause the respirator, the device, to stop functioning. It basically fully stopped, even though this was a USB diagnostic port that wasn't supposed to have any impact on the device at all. And we were assured that it wouldn't be. There's nothing that the USB port could do that could cause damage. And when we fuzzed it, the entire device stopped operation. So when we test it, this is the sort of thing we're doing. We're testing the USB device to make sure that it's fully, that misfunction of the device, you could cause the device to fail. The USB port could stop functioning, but that the device itself continues to provide patient care and doesn't in any way get interrupted by doing that is really critically important. So that's the sorts of things we're doing when we're doing the USB testing. We're making sure that, what happens if somebody puts something malicious in there or does something bad, and to make sure that there's no way that USB port can have a negative harm or impact on the client in any way. I think we have some in the chat as well. The questions are coming in different places. Instead of the questionnaire, they're also coming in the chat. So we are going to pass the slides out to people.
Yes, well, I will get the presentation to Rachel, and she will distribute it to all the attendees, as well as she informed me that this has been recorded and that members will have the ability to download the recording and watch it as a live stream, if you would. Is that correct, Rachel?
That is absolutely correct. And I do think
I did listen.
Yeah, you did. No, it's perfect. We will absolutely be getting this out afterwards to everyone who registered. I think Nick in the audience has his hand raised. So Nick, I will actually allow you to talk if you'd like to ask your question.
You're still muted, Nick. Just to give you the heads up. That's our favorite term of 2020 and 2021. You're still muted.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Nick, if you decide to come off mute, you can definitely ask. If not, if there's any other questions, we've got a few minutes left, and I think this has been incredibly informative.
Yeah. And if you have some questions that you don't want to ask publicly, our email addresses are on the screen right now. And if you want to privately email myself or George, feel free. We'll be happy to do that. We know that some people don't like to ask questions in a group situation because you may feel like you don't know something. Mind you, I have to tell you that medical space, there's stuff I don't know all the time, and I'm getting very comfortable with my lack of knowledge on topics.
I find that hard to believe, Joe.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, George, you can't know everything. Anyone that tells you they know everything, they're
yeah, that's true.
I question that, right?
Joe knows a lot.
I think there's one more question that came through. Just so you guys know, it's in the Q&A.
Oh, is there? Okay, this is from the Q&A.
One more from Colin, yeah.
Okay, actually, it's another one from just double check the 10 principles of security design. Is the OWASP list? Yes, it is the OWASP list.
Yes.
Absolutely, and we are big fans. We, as a security company, we invent things when it's necessary, but it's rarely necessary. We like to leverage standards in industry that exist and that have been vetted through the masses. And we actually participate in OWASP and are members of OWASP and other standards organizations to make sure that, we're participating in those standards and contributing. So it's an OWASP list that we also help create. So yes, it's a bit of both. I also see, Lauren, are there different security requirements for building something for the government versus civilian use? Yes, there is.
Great question. Absolutely.
Great question.
Great
oh my
question.
God, yes, there is. First off, civilian use is hard. Government use is harder. And you want to add to that, George?
Yeah. So typically, we're seeing with government use, particularly in the United States, for people supplying, say, to the Veterans Administration, the need for cryptography and integrating a FIPS validated cryptography module into their device. We do offer FIPS validation 140-3, which the -2 standard is being sunset September of this year. So we're advocating for the -3. If you've not been through a FIPS validation process, we take it. We offer a workshop training first, so the manufacturer can understand the impact it will have, and then we go forward with the assessment. So it's a 2-step process for FIPS validation. If you've not been through it before, if you've been through it before, we can certainly go right to the validation process.
Absolutely. And I do not do FIPS validation because you need to have PhDs in mathematics and other things that I do not have. And that, those folks know their math way better than right. I do.
But it's certainly something that Intertek, EWA,
absolutely.
Intertek Acumen can provide to the device community.
Another thing too, depending on where that device sits on the network and the type of, if it's a military hospital and things like that, you may even see requirements for common criteria certification. So that's not that's a possibility as well. It's rare, but I've heard of that happening as well.
And that's hardest.
The hardest.
That's the hardest. To be clear.
Yeah.
Common criteria.
Yeah. But the nice thing about all these standards is that if you did a UL 2900 certification, it would make you're meeting 90% of the requirements of a common criteria certification. So what I'm saying is there's layers to this, that when you've done, even if you do a 62443 certification, that's going to make your UL 2900 certification a lot easier. That all of these things have commonality to them, and that one builds on the other. And because of that, if we've done a 62443 certification for you, and then you come to us and ask for a UL 2900 certification, we're going to be able to give you a price benefit on that, because there's going to be a delta difference. Right? We're going to be able to we're going to be able to reuse a lot of the test cases we had in one to say, hey, we've already got the answers to these, so we just need to do the delta difference between those two standards, right? How much time does it take to do security standard medical device? It depends on which standard you're going for.
And which task.
But a vulnerability assessment penetration test, which is sort of the baseline to do for something, is generally about 4 to 5 weeks or less. We could do it theoretically. We could do a UL 2900 certification in 4 to 5 weeks. I've never seen it happen because just getting your documentation together to give me the evidence of requirements takes months for organizations to do if you don't know the standard. And the more realistic aspect of this is if you've never done something like an IEC 62443 certification or a UL 2900 certification, I would tell you that it can happen in 6 months, but expect about a year. It really depends on your maturity and how much documentation you have.
Absolutely, Joe. And just to add on that, even with the baseline penetration test and vulnerability assessment, we've had clients who have submitted their product and the password for that device has been password. And that was uncovered in the first hour of our assessment. And then when we notified the manufacturer then went back to the proverbial drawing board, came back 2 weeks later. We didn't shut the project down, but the delay, the turn was obviously, it extrapolates out because of the manufacturer had to go back to the drawing board. So that happens. And word of caution, password is not a good password.
No, it's not.
It's while it's 8 characters, it's not a good password.
No,
I did know that one. I've learned that one myself.
And we
good job, Rachel.
Yeah, we have one other question here from Paul asking, do you have any recommendations for startup looking to effectively incorporate secure architecture and coding into their design? Yes. To start with, the Open Web Application Security Project, OWASP, provides a massive free resource of tremendous information. So it's owasp.org. Use them, leverage them well, become members, follow their standards. They have a lot of information. But beyond that, really having someone like us do a security design review for you early on can be fairly cost effective. And not difficult. So if you're starting to build a product, if you've got a prototype done and you want to get some BA pen testing done, then we can do that. And again, those are valuable activities to do. So look at those sorts of activities first. I would recommend anyone to do vulnerability assessment, penetration test, design reviews prior to going for certification to a standard, because these are the basic fundamentals, and make sure you got your ducks in a row before you go for a high bar hit, right? So that's what I'd start with. Anything you want to add to that, George?
Yeah, I think that starting with the secure by design, the FDA, and I'll quote the FDA actually said, Susan Schwartz, I did a presentation with her about a year ago. It's better to plan for it to plug it in. So if you are in the startup phase, absolutely planning for your security is very critical, because you don't want to try to plug it in, post-mortem when you submit your tech file, and then you have to go back and address it. It's better to do it now than when you're submitting to the FDA, if that's your end goal, as an example.
Absolutely.
Great questions, Joe.
Answered all the questions. Oh wait, we did get one more. Oh my gosh, I keep saying there's always gonna be one more question. Okay, there's one more in the chat.
Okay, there's one more. I was feeling bad that we finished the slide deck early. I'm not feeling bad now. Because it gave more. The questions are always the best part of this. For
absolutely, 100%.
But the slides we do 100 times. We're bored with the slides, but this is the stuff we like. This is stuff we go for. Can you talk a little about medical device industry will begin to tackle interoperability ultimately? Who would be responsible for the security aspects? The company responsible for the interoperability components, or the company that the device plugs into? That is a great question.
Well, that's it's funny. There actually is a UL standard for interoperability, and it's UL 2800. Yes. And I have not seen any movement from that STP in the better part of a year. And I can follow up. I know some people on the STP to see if there's been any interaction. As far as the ownership from a device perspective, I would have to say it's largely to be determined, because if it's not been implemented and it's not become a requirement, it's hard to say who's going to be culpable in the interoperability. But for the security perspective of that, the onus is truly on the device manufacturer.
Absolutely, yeah. So to that end, you have to consider that whatever. If you're talking about inbound communications to your device coming from another device, it's always going to be your responsibility to make sure that no matter how that input comes in, that you're dealing with it and it's not causing a negative impact to your device. So you're saying, well, the standard says he should format his information in this way, and the interoperability standard says it should follow this frame and this format, and this is the way that I'm supposed to be getting messages from it. I don't care. You got to have your device robust enough that no matter what information gets thrown at your device from another device, that you respond to it. And that, when you're sending or receiving data from other devices, you've got to have plans to what if that data is bad or not working well, and all that sort of stuff. So, the ultimate responsibility is you as a device have to make sure that you're not going to be maliciously negatively impacted from a security perspective. Interoperability, though, as far as what messaging format you're going to send, there are a lot of standards out there, and there's one called MQTT. that is really popular. So the MQTT protocol is what we're seeing used by a lot of devices for interoperability and communication. So if somebody was to say, what do? I would say, do not create a new standard protocol. There is 1,000 protocols out there. Do not create your new proprietary, our protocol is better than everyone else's protocol. That's been done a million times. That goes down to a bad place. Find an industry standard, something like MQTT or something else, and then use that for your communications protocol. And now I think we've answered
yes, I think we did. I think we are safe. Okay, well, let me just say, George, Joe, that was fantastic. What an incredible presentation and an incredible amount of information. Thank you so much for putting that together.
Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it. It's our pleasure.
It was a thrill. No, absolutely. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And you will be receiving, as we said, a copy of the slides in the video. You have contact information for George and Joe. I highly recommend that you reach out to them to talk through a lot of these things. They are an incredible resource for you and a group that we are so thrilled to be partnering with at MassMedic. So for everyone at MassMedic, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.